On this week's Paddock Pass podcast, we have a special chat about smooth, slick components of MotoGP that are full of hot, irrepressible air. So I cannot think of two better journalists to join me for this latest episode. Hello, Neil Morrison.
Hello, Adam Wheeler.
And hello, David Emmett. You've been to some secret places in the course of the last week.
So secret that even employees of the company which I visited haven't even been there. So, yes, it was very interesting. But you're talking about being slick. Just before the podcast started, we were all on about how that none of us have had a shave and we all need one. So I'm not quite sure about slick.
Yeah, this is grizzled before the season starts. Imagine what we'll be like midway through.
Thankfully, only our family watch us on the YouTube videos. So, audio-wise, you don't have to worry about the state of our respective selves. I'm Adam Wheeler, and I do have my own secret trip coming up, actually, with a swift journey to Zavulia this week. But first, we got Dave's account of his exclusive trip to Clermont-Ferrand, a rare interview with MotoGP legend Dani Pedrosa. A big thanks to Sarah Kinraid and the Red Bull KTM crew for helping with that. And some perspectives on Jorge Martin, a potential 2024 world champion. A couple of other topics as well as the MotoGP season starts. As you heard at the top of the show, rental.com is the place to go to upgrade your street bike and look for those perfect high quality accessories. There's a ton to choose from. We're also pleased to have Fly Racing backing us again in 2024. Check out some of the best, smartest and most protective off-road helmets with the Formula S, a lid that contains sensors and crucially won't let you down in the event of an emergency. Curious to know more? Then 2 clicks on flyracing.com will have you sorted. Right, Dave, what was all the secrecy with Michelin?
Well, the secrecy was that they showed us how they make MotoGP tyres, and they don't show anyone that. There are genuinely a lot of people inside of Michelin who don't do this. They have 3 special machines which produce the tyres. They're laid down sort of layer by layer, if you like, with rubber and cords mixed, sort of extruded onto a tyre, sort of printed onto a tyre. They feed in sort of lots of thin strips of various compounds, and it allows them to construct the tyres very, very concisely. I mean, the reason for inviting a bunch of journalists was basically just because Michelin were getting tired of lots and lots of complaints. One of the things that came up was, riders only ever complain about the tyres and never say anything good about it. But, I mean, that's the loss of any single tyre supplier. I think I've said this lots and lots of times before. You don't get praise until you decide to leave, and then everyone says, "Oh, you made such fantastic tyres." But it was genuinely fascinating. It was incredible the precision with which these things are put together. They can only produce each of these machines can only produce about 30 tyres a day, and they have 3 of these machines, so they're only producing about 100 times a day. When they come out of the machine, they're visually inspected, they're scanned, they're x-rayed, they're tested to see if they're balanced and true, and they also basically 1 out of every 1% of the tyres they destructively test, which basically means cutting it apart and seeing if it genuinely has been put together. So they were really keen to show us their quality control, the way that it's managed, and that was genuinely fascinating. The fact that also it's just rear tyres which are done like this at the moment. One of the things they want to do with the 2025 front tyres, the current front tyres are done the old way, and the reason that it's only the rear tyres is because it's all about performance. Performance is so sensitive to. Or the rear tyre is where a lot of the performance come from, and so any deviations will start to make a difference. And Michelin's entire efforts is focused on making sure that these tyres are as consistent as humanly possible. Just doing everything they can to make sure that that everything is consistent, and the amount of control, the amount of checking that went into it, I was genuinely impressed at how they do it. Now, of course, the trouble is they leave the factory and then they're put into trucks and they're put into, they are, all of the transport and storage is conditioned. But from there on, Michelin don't have so much control over it. They have less control over what happens to the tires, and that's where it all goes. Or that's where inconsistencies can could come in. So it was genuinely a really, really fascinating trip. And it's also interesting to learn about how they build the tires, design the tires, and choose which compounds to use where, and all the rest of it.
Dave, you say you were convinced by the quality control. I mean, we hear riders telling us that they've had a duff tire, that they cannot explain the reason for a drop in performance compared to, say, the previous day or the previous week or the previous year at a Grand Prix. Did you see anything in the process that seems to indicate, when Michelin move these tires or they freight them to another part of the world, that there is a chance that things could go wrong? I mean, are they really that delicate?
What came up again and again is how, these riders are so incredibly sensitive, and that everything is so incredibly close that the tiniest details make a huge difference. And so what came up, what they showed us was that a lot of it can just be very, very small it can be very, very small feel. So, for example, they got a hot tire out and a cold tire out, and the cold tire, they let us actually sort of punch it and try to squeeze it, and it's just a rock solid thing, it just doesn't move. And then you get a hot tire out, which is sort of 90 degrees or 100 degrees out of tire warmers. And also, I think they actually have like a heated place which got it up to proper temperature, 110, 120 degrees. And you cannot. I mean, the thing is, it's almost like putty. I mean, you can squash it and bounce it and move it around, and it was the difference was shocking. And they talked about the difference between, so at some tracks, say Phillip Islands, where you're spending a lot of time on the left-hand side of the tire, there can be a temperature difference of 60 degrees between the left and right side of the tire. And if you think of how soft a hot tire is and how quickly it gets stiff when it's not there, then just that shifting from side to side, the difference in feedback in tires, that's what makes the difference. And I think this is exactly where riders are not, when they feel something different, there are so many factors that go into that. The track temperature. The one thing that Michelin do have is a relatively narrow operating window. They have made it much wider, but they still have a relatively narrow operating window. And if the temperature goes up sort of 2 or 3 degrees, or it drops 2 or 3 degrees, then that changes the feedback from the tire. It can also, it can come from the asphalt. It can come from setup. There's so many places where it could come from. It could come from the tires as well, but it makes it so difficult to actually find out. And the riders are so sensitive to every single change that it makes it really, really difficult. One example that came up was Valentino Rossi. They talked about, like Valentino Rossi was incredibly good at understanding the feedback from the tires and explaining what was going on with the tires. And I remember, I think someone talking about maybe Jerry Burgess, who, if you showed him a picture of Valentino Rossi at a track, he could tell you what lap he was on, because Rossi he was adjusting his riding style every single lap to compensate for the way that the tires had changed. And this is something, I think, which is making a big difference. Riders who are not quite as good as Valentino Rossi, and to be perfectly honest, that's quite a long list. They're not quite as good as at doing that, at getting the feedback, at understanding how the tire is changing and how they need to change to adapt to it.
Dave, you mentioned there was some criticism towards Michelin at the end of last year, particularly from one rider and particularly from one team in MotoGP. Was there an explanation eventually offered up as to what happened with Jorge Martin in Qatar in the Sunday race?
Yeah, I mean, they took that tire back. They also showed us how they check the tire. They literally strip the rubber off the surface to examine it gets x-rayed. They strip the rubber off to examine the cords underneath to make sure that they're all complete. They do a tensile strength test on it to see how much how much the cords have been weakened during The test, there was nothing wrong with the tire when it came back. They found nothing wrong with it. They also pointed out that when Jorge Martin, when he came off you saw that big spin as he got off the line. The rider behind him had a similar spin, had a smaller spin, but there seems to have been something at that point on the track where there was a little bit less grip, and that was it. And then Martin goes into a completely different riding mode, if you like. He's no longer, you've got an idea in your head of how the race is going to unfold. If you are sort of, at the front in the top 2 or 3, then you have an idea of how you're going to manage the race. When that goes wrong and you suddenly find yourself back in, what was it? I think he was down 8th or 9th or something after at the start. You start running a completely different race. It's a completely different catch-up race. For a start, you've got everything on the bike changes because you're having to push it a lot more, a lot harder. You're riding differently. You're loading the tires differently. That is a much more logical explanation for why everything felt different to there actually being or there necessarily being something wrong with the tire. So they were not throwing Jorge Martin under the bus, but they were strongly defending their corner. They checked the tire, and looking at their verification process, there was, they do check these things very, very thoroughly, and that was what was very, very interesting.
Dave, I know we're asking you to essentially spoon your memory onto the table, but what did you learn from what Michelin had to say about the 25 tires and what might be coming up and how it will help change MotoGP potentially?
Yeah, they didn't say a lot about the 25 tires. They did say they're going to be more consistent because they'll be using this special sort of machine production process. They're moving towards a harder. Basically, they're using for 2024. They're using these new compounds which are harder but have the same levels of grip, which should help. They need to test the 2025 tire as much as possible, but they're already running into the problem that factories and teams just don't want to test it. It's right at the bottom of their list of priorities. A factory and a team are only interested in testing the things that will make them faster next week. They're not at all interested in some theoretical future where everything is going to change. So they're having problems to do this. I mean, we're getting an extra test this year at Mugello, which is specifically to test the front tire to see how it reacts. But there's always a lot of resistance, and they do believe that this tire is, for a start, it's going to be more consistent. Secondly, it's going to be able to much better cope with the aerodynamics and with the loads which are being enforced. It's a different profile. It's a different carcass, a different construction as well. But because it is different, it really needs to be tested.
Was there a consensus, Dave, that Michelin perhaps should have done this nearer the start of their stint as the sole tyre supplier to MotoGP? I mean, it sounds like, they had a lot of good information, especially with, the recent phase into renewable materials and whatever else that they're working towards. And, it was more prevalent in Moto E, of course. But it does sound like it was a really valuable kind of exercise, certainly in PR, even though you weren't allowed to take any photos or do any kind of recordings.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, yes, I think what they underestimated, because one of the things they said was, when MotoGP first went single tire, Michelin said, we don't want to do this. We're not interested in it. And then they soon realized that was a mistake, because you get so much data from racing that you cannot get anywhere else. And so it becomes an incredibly important test bed. So, for example, the Moto E tires produced from renewable and recyclable materials. And a lot of that is, like, where do you source your materials? How easy is it to produce? Do you have to completely change the way that you produce these tires, or transform these materials into something you can put into tires? Does that scale to industrial scale production? So there's lots of those sort of things. But I think when Michelin got back into MotoGP in 2016, because they didn't have much experience as a single tire supplier or another series, they didn't really think about how they're going to end up as a kicking boy. Or as a whipping boy, how as the default to blame, because whenever something goes wrong, the first thing you blame is the tyres, because the tyres are such an absolutely crucial part on the motorcycle, arguably the most important part on the motorcycle. It's the feedback between the tyres and the rider's brain, basically. That's what determines your performance. So any deviation, any slight sort of failure, and it's the one thing that the teams have no control over. And so it's a nice, easy thing to blame. When, if something goes wrong, then obviously it was the tyres that get blamed. And again, this is something, if you watch the news at night on the TV, what you see is all the things that are going horribly wrong in the world. You don't see, a man saves puppy from drowning, or, man gives his wife a big sloppy kiss for being such a lovely person. You don't get that. It's all, murder and death and war and crime and everything's terrible. And that is what Michelin didn't realise, that they would only get the negative side and they never get the praise.
I don't know, Dave. I mean, Liverpool won another trophy last weekend, so Neil was probably watching every set of news broadcasts there were on TV.
Still am, actually, while Dave's talking.
Well, listen, I mean, I was on the plane to Qatar for the test. I was watching the two-parter Unridables series made by Greenlight. And for international listeners, go onto YouTube and write Unridables in the search bar, and you'll find these two fantastic programs made about 1980s, early 1990s 500cc Grand Prix racing. And it is a timely reminder that tyres and tyre war was such a big factor in the result sheets and how people got on those. I mean, Neil, I don't know if you can remember, but the differences between the Dunlops and the Michelins back then, I mean, if you didn't have decent Michelins, then you weren't going to be doing anything for more than a couple of laps. And so fans that are new to MotoGP, and we're well over a decade that, Bridgestone and Michelin have been the sole tyre suppliers through this vast era, racing was really down to the black stuff. I mean, it made such a big deal.
It did, yeah, exactly. And eventually, I think what it boiled down to was when Bridgestone really started kicking Michelin's ass in about 2007, when Ducati were aboard the Bridgestones and Yamaha and Honda were on the Michelins, and Rossi was getting left behind. And then he actually made the controversial decision to switch to Bridgestones in 2008. And I think the sole supplier, I think, came in the year after, Dave, if I'm not mistaken, 2009.
2009, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, Rossi, I remember consistently making the point in 2007 when he was losing the championship to Casey Stoner. People don't turn on their TVs on a Sunday to see the battle between Bridgestone and Michelin. They turn on their TVs to see the battle between certain riders, and even in some cases to see how manufacturers are getting on. They're not particularly invested in one tire brand or the other, and I think that is true. It always did throw up the occasional crazy, strange result when you had different tire companies competing at the front, but it was becoming, I think, ridiculously expensive. And what we have seen in the last, there's many reasons why the racing has been the way it has been since 2016, but some of the close racing that we've had, I think, is partly down to the rubber that Michelin supply.
Yeah, the single tyres thing is actually quite interesting, because the reason for the big difference was from 2006 to 2007. They basically changed the rules, so you had to declare which tyres you'd be using on, I think, the Thursday, or I can't remember if it was the Thursday or the Friday, but it basically meant you had to have all of your tyres already at the circuit by then, and that killed the Saturday night special. And the Saturday night special was Michelin would take at European tracks. Michelin would take the data from Friday, and the weather forecast, combine it with the weather forecast, and they'd pick the perfect compounds to be racing on Sunday. And that was so good that, for example, Tony Elias's win at Portugal in 2006, that was because he had a set of tyres which Dani Pedrosa had rejected, didn't want. It gave him such a boost in performance that he was able to win that race. Well, that and a terrible mistake by Kenny Roberts Jr. But that's a different matter, a bit of a lap miscounting there. But the Dawn of the FIM wanted to sort of like take away, or level the playing field, take away Michelin's advantage of being able to tailor tyres to the exact set of circumstances. And so you had to supply your tyres previously, and Bridgestone had already been doing that. Bridgestone had been shipping their tyres over from Japan sort of weeks in advance. And so they had to have tyres which operated in a much broader temperature range. And so they just cleaned up. They were just so much better precisely because of that. And that was how we ended up with a single tyre in 2009, because Michelin just couldn't keep up and nobody wanted to race the Michelins. I think they ended up with about, there were maybe 4 teams or 4 riders who were willing to race the Michelins. And, Michelin said it's just not worth our while doing it.
Dave, you're like the ultimate used tyre for the podcast. We're fully appreciative of your trips to Michelin. So thanks for letting us know what went on.
And ready to throw me away in the bin and recycle me into something useful.
Yeah, when anything goes wrong, you're the person we blame. Don't worry, Dave.
That's fair. That's fair.
You can be reheated now and again. I'm sure your lovely wife can testify to that. So there we go. Neil, you've been rolling back to your days when you were a secretive DJ and MC to create some audio picks about Jorge Martin. What's in store?
What is in store is basically a collection of insights from certain people in the paddock that work with Jorge Martin or have worked with him in the past, just to give a bit of an understanding as to how he does what he does. We've obviously spoken quite a lot on the pod about how he was probably the most exciting thing to watch in MotoGP last year. Basically saved the championship from being a kind of a one-way cakewalk for Pecco Bagnaia. I was quite intrigued to know just how he did it now. We've also mentioned a few times in this podcast how the press officer at Pramac Racing maybe is somewhat lacking in availability. So therefore, actually speaking to Jorge himself proved to be quite difficult. However, his crew chief, Daniele Romagnoli, is a really interesting guy to speak to, as are people like Alessio Spargaro, Paolo Giovatti, and Albert Valera, Jorge's personal manager. So managed to speak to those different guys. And that is what we're about to hear.
And thankfully, your dulcet tones have been narrating its way through this little clip. So if everyone has their cocoa slippers and favourite cushion to hand, we'll begin.
Whether you're a fan of the bullish swagger and fast talk or not, few could deny that Jorge Martin was the breakout star of 2023. Midway through last year, MotoGP was in danger of cruising to a snoozy conclusion before the Spaniard stepped up to take the fight to reigning world champion Pecco Bagnaia. Even though he just fell short, with some justification, Jorge could call himself the fastest rider in the world last year. So, with that in mind, the Paddock Pass podcast spoke to a number of figures close to the Spaniard to find out just how he did it. Firstly, natural talent. Jorge's speed was apparent from his first days in the Red Bull Rookies Cup. It was back in 2014 when a certain 5-time world champion noted just how much corner speed he could carry through Mugello's long, fast curves. Jorge's personal manager, Albert Valera, picks up the story.
I would say he was on his second or third year, the year that he won. That was May. At that moment, he was doing Mugello. And I remember with Jorge Lorenzo, we were watching the race, the Rookies Cup, in the motorhome, Jorge and I together. And I remember that Jorge told me, wow, that guy, he's super good. Look at his speed corner. And by that day, he won the race in Mugello by 3 or 4 seconds. And then we started talking. At that moment, he did a couple of races in Finchep, replacing some, I think, Arenas. He was replacing Arenas. And I went to see him in Barcelona, to see his family in Finchep. It was like love at first glance, and we were happy to start working together.
It was that talent which carried Jorge to a world championship in 2018. And what really stood out in those years was his blistering one-lap speed, as Jorge amassed 20 pole positions in 2 seasons, a frankly ludicrous number. That talent was also very clear to current crew chief Daniele Romagnoli when Jorge stepped up to MotoGP at the start of 2021. I spoke to Daniele at the tail end of last year.
First of all, he's a young rider. And this young rider, when it comes to MotoGP, already has a lot of knowledge from previous categories, means knowledge how the bikes work in the system. So was already a rider, ready for the MotoGP, means he knows the system out, anti-wheelie, power, the engine braking. And so this is the first time also when I was checking the data with him, I can explain something, and it looks like really easy understanding what we are checking on the data. Also, sometimes we suggest something, you think maybe he didn't understood already. No, actually he said, I will do this on the track, and he did. So this was a very good point for me, this rider. Also, he's very fast. This rider, like especially in the fast corner, he's very fast, entering the corner, taking the corner speed very high. Also, his riding style is quite different from, let's say, the riders of 5 years ago, for example. He's leaning so much from the bike, and so this helps him from a good turning on the bike.
Still, that blinding speed didn't translate into results in 2022 for numerous reasons. Chiefly, Martin never really got to grips with his Desmos Medici GP22, which was inferior to Bagnaglia's 21-22 hybrid. Then there was the small matter of the battle for the seat alongside Bagnaia in the factory team in 2023. In ex-Ducati sporting director Paolo Ciabatti's eyes, the fact that Jorge was passed up for the factory seat always meant he would enter the year with a point to prove, with a chip on his shoulder. And as it turned out, this was an extra motivator which fueled Jorge's feats.
This season, I was pretty sure that he would, do extremely good. I think mainly for two reasons. I think first of all, he's on a full GP23 bike. Last year, as you know, the Pramac riders and Marini, they had a different engine version from the two factory riders, which was good, but maybe more complicated to set up with the electronics. So this might have affected some of the results last year. And I also think, knowing his very proud character, also he wanted to prove a point that he was deserving the factory ride, the full factory ride, meaning the factory team or the full factory ride. We decided what we decided because of, mainly it was a moment in the year where Enea had won 4 Grand Prix, so there was a lot of expectation also from many people, including sponsors, that we would go in that direction. But when we took the decision, we assured Jorge that he would get obviously not only the same financial treatment, but also exactly the same technical package.
Ducati's GP23 was a clear step up on what Martin was riding before, and he immediately gelled with the new bike at the first pre-season test. But even still, in the first races of last year, there were some issues, and we didn't see Jorge really come into his own until arguably Mugello in the June of last year. That was because he still was honing his aggression. We saw several races and several rounds at the start of 2023 when Martin could not get past the riders in front, Jerez being a prime example. He was arguably one of the fastest guys on the track that day, but couldn't be as aggressive as Bagnaia in the heat of the battle when fighting with the KTMs. That was all a far cry to the Martin we saw in the end of the year. And as Daniele Romagnoli explains, they found a change midway through the season which helped him be more aggressive in the battle.
This is true. Always his speed has been fast when he was riding alone, but then also the combination of how these bikes develop, especially about the aerodynamic package, makes some difficulties on braking. So when you're following a rider, it's much more difficult to stop the bike. So if he was riding alone, he has a good pace in Jerez. But then in race, when he was behind others, difficult to stop, and he got passed by other riders. I remember also very well, Pecco passed him very easily. I mean, in general, we weren't good enough, like we are now, on braking area. So, always, for example, Pecco was better. He was managing better, let's say, this kind of aerodynamic package. And also his skill on braking is very good, Pecco. So we start to work very, very hard about braking area and how to improve this area. So it takes a couple of races. But then we've seen already in Barcelona was already a good step, coming quite good. Yeah, at the time Aprilia was faster than us because we are ready. But then we did a step, especially in Barcelona. And from the time on, keeping that base setting, also we've seen even in Germany, in Sachsenring, how good was also Martin on braking as well, also with Pecco. So I can say the biggest step we have done on braking, and once he got the confidence on braking hard, he can enter and pass other riders like he's doing these days.
Other factors contributed to his speed last year as well. At the start of 2022, Martin often complained he was still suffering the physical side effects of his massive practice spill in Portugal the year before. There were no such complaints in 2023, when he repeatedly told us how his physical condition was better than ever. This was partly down to friend and mentor Alicia Spargaro giving him some tips and training advice on how to arrive at a race weekend in the best physical shape possible.
I'm older than him, so many things that he's experimenting right now, I already go through. So I'll try to give some tips. Obviously, you know, guys, how I love to be good physically, and I was not like this when I was his age. So I'll try to help him to don't do my mistakes and to be in shape earlier than me. And he learned a lot. Actually, I think he's in really good physical condition also because I help him a lot. And then he's also really a family man. To be that young is really a family man. So he loves to spend time with my family because he's alone in Andorra, and I think also is helping him a little bit.
And it wasn't just that. Learning again from Espargaro, Martin knows the value of forging close bonds with those working in his garage. Despite desiring a spot in Ducati's factory team for 2023, he repeatedly talked up the family atmosphere in the Pramac box, and repeatedly appeared at home jibing at the lack of pressure he felt when compared to Bagnaia as well, his factory rival. As Romagnoli explained, the Spaniard is responsible for creating that dynamic. And as Romagnoli recalls, Martin took his entire team to Punta Cana at the start of 2022 as a reward for helping him to his first MotoGP victory in Austria the year before.
And as a person, I like him so much because the person is important, how the rider make also the feeling inside the garage. Inside our garage, we really work really smooth, all the mechanics with him, a good relationship. Always, they say most of the time is positive, is making, don't want to say happiness, but feel that the team comfortable, talking with the mechanics and giving jokes and receiving jokes, sometimes even bad jokes means, okay, he's slow, you are really slow, why, what do you do? You don't go nowhere if you go slow like that, but just joking with him. So the atmosphere with him is very good. And then also last year, after the first year, then when we celebrate the win in Austria, we went everybody in Punta Cana with him. This is the first experience for me with the rider, bring all the team and don't talk at all about motorbikes and GP, just have other, like a friend. And for this reason, this rider is very good, how the atmosphere makes in the garage. The atmosphere we have in this garage for me is really amazing. The best team ever I ever worked.
So, a mixture of natural talent, riding style, confidence, professional pride, attitude towards fitness, and forging close bonds with his team were all responsible for Martin's exceptional performance in 2023. So what of this season? Well, after a sterling second place in the World Championship, surely 2024 offers the perfect chance to go one better. To do that, however, Martin acknowledged he must handle pressure in a better way than he did towards the tail end of last season. One thing, though, could get in the way. Martin's feeling that Ducati has shunned him has never really gone away, and comments at Valencia last November indicated he still feels bitter that he's not wearing the factory red. After his recent feats, there will certainly be more than one factory looking to secure his signature for 2025. Yet, testing performances suggest he'll be pushing Bagnaia pretty hard for the ultimate honours once again.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. And I think one of the things that sort of ties the Jorge Martin into Michelin is also, we've seen he's got such a unique style. He's off the bike so far. They're leaned over so far. That again is down to the tyres. That's a development of the tyres. We're getting to such insane lean angles because the tyres produce such incredible amounts of grip, 60, 62, 63 degrees. That's, I think 1.4, 1.5 G, something like that in the corner, which is ridiculous cornering forces. And one of the reasons that Jorge can actually get his body so far off the bike is because the tyres are keeping him in place.
Dave, you were vocal this week on Twitter about MotoGP potentially being sold, with Liberty Media being connected. CEO Carmelo Espeleta has already gone on record to Italian news site, I believe, La Repubblica, by saying anything can happen at any time. I mean, everybody has their price. God knows we're all quite so cheap on the Paddock Pass podcast. But even if there was an ownership change, then you would assume that company, whether it's Liberty or someone else, won't be tipping over the cart of business that makes money. You might be able to arrange a few different things on display, but you're not going to see any radical changes in MotoGP.
No, absolutely. You're not going to see any changes. I don't think Liberty is going to buy it either, because we've seen this before. The European Competition Commission turned down, they allowed CVC to buy Formula One, but only on the condition that they sold MotoGP, because otherwise there would be too much. Having both F1 and MotoGP under the same umbrella would give too much market power, especially in the broadcast market in terms of broadcast rights. So for that reason, I find it very difficult to believe that Liberty could or would be allowed to buy Dorna. But certainly, yeah, I mean, like Bridgepoint will be looking for an exit. I saw the valuation by the Spanish publication L'Expansión of 4 billion euros. It was valued at about 1 billion when Dorna, when it was a CVC actually, or when Bridgepoint bought it from Dorna. And so, in fact, I think a little bit less, 760 or something like that. So, Bridgepoint are looking to withdraw. They've paid themselves hundreds of millions in dividends. They're looking to actually get out. This is what venture capital firms do, or investment funds do. They put money in and they try to extract as much profit from it as possible. Whether that's a good thing or not is a separate issue for discussion. But yeah, I mean, the Bridgepoint would be looking to something like triple their investment when they do sell it. So we shall see. And of course, these things are always for sale. If someone comes along with a very, very large amount of money, then they are going to then Dorna or Bridgepoint would be foolish to turn it down, and whoever takes it over is not going to kill the goose that's laying the golden egg. There's MotoGP and Dorna still have a few, they have issues. There's a lot of things they could do better. They do think a lot of things really well. There's things they could do better, especially in terms of commercially exploiting the championship. But they generate a lot of money. And the one thing that they're not going to do, that a new owner would do, would be to threaten that.
I'm interested in the business mechanics or the dynamic of it all, because if you look behind the scenes, then MotoGP doesn't have a great, enormous amount of outside sponsors. The main kind of revenue stream does seem to be, circuit sanctioning fees, as well as, of course, the TV rights. That itself is perhaps a market that's in flux, because are people now really paying good money to be watching live sports still? I mean, there seems to be a lot of catch up going on. I do wonder if that whole model of exclusivity to one particular channel or broadcaster or stream is really going to be that relevant in 5 years' time. That's something where I think a lot of Dorna's, not only their profit margin, but their balance sheets and their budgets to essentially move the championship around the globe is taking, swallowing a lot of it. And, do they maximize one particular area of the world, or do they look towards a different kind of, bigger audience share, but then trying to get that commercial nuance involved? It's complicated.
No, I mean, it absolutely is complicated. What you have to remember, circuits are paying somewhere between 8 and 10 million euros to host a race. On average, there are tracks who are paying a lot more, tracks who are paying a lot less. But the thing about live sports, which makes them attractive to broadcasters and also to streamers, is that they're live. They only happen once. They're happening at one time. That gives them an added value. Things like TV series and films and all the rest of it, that's a shifting market, if you like. Those things can happen at any time. You can watch that at any time, and people will watch it or they won't. Whereas with a live sporting event has an element of anticipation that streaming, other broadcasts forms just don't have. That makes it very attractive. I mean, you see a lot of money going into live sports, especially things like football and the other top tier sports. But MotoGP is benefiting from that. I mean, in the end, you end up really with a huge problem of where does the money come from. Sponsorship is going to be a problem, because the more that if you give the rights to a broadcaster who is who is paying a lot to put it behind a paywall for whatever reason, then that means that you're losing a lot of sponsorship because you're losing, a large amount of audience. And that's one of those chicken and egg things where either way, it's really, really difficult.
Well, if you take the most televised sport in the world, I mean, it has to be football. And it's a case whereby I think fans now, instead of looking at a certain date or a certain time to watch a match, can flick on the TV and any evening during a week and find a match. It's more like the sport is provided as a form of, there's always football on. You can always find a game. And
Tell me about it.
And that's kind of different to MotoGP, of course, which is always going to be 2 p.m. on a Sunday. I mean, you have to orientate yourself around, perhaps, of course, fans of the sport know where to find it. They know what time is going to happen. But then to get new people on board, they're going to be finding out about the race or the action or the clips from a different place. And I just wonder how these lucrative TV deals will end up surviving in the future. And perhaps they will still exist, but at a lower cost. And then Dorna has to sort of reevaluate its revenue model.
Yeah, but I think you have to remember, I mean, like, no one is putting, shall we say, Leighton Orient behind a paywall and expecting billions of people to stump up lots and lots of cash for it. No offence to Leighton Orient, I know nothing about football except liking the name Leighton Orient. However, the Champions League, World Cup, European Cup. I mean, I think there's going to be some kind of international championship this summer, and I presume a lot of people want to see that. And that's where you're seeing the astronomical amounts of money changing hands. And that again is it's more of a unique event. And so I think the bigger problem for Dorna, and this is something we've talked about before, is having, like we've got 22 races, the additional value of that 22nd race is much, much lower than the additional value of like the 17th or the 18th race. At some point, it just becomes too much.
Something I'd like to discuss, and I'll come to you first, Neil, for your opinion. MotoGP content and the portrayal of the riders. Does MotoGP need to get cooler by bigging up the gnarly nature of the sport, or should it go more kind of infantile and create this personality-led content? I just wonder whether trying to make, Alex Rins, Jack Miller, Joan Mir look kind of goofy and, I don't know, appealing to a very particular age demographic is the way to go, when maybe you could be showing them sliding a rear tire, pulling a cool wheelie, or what's kind of your thoughts on that? Do you think it's going in the wrong direction if that's such a concept?
I don't see any reason why you can't do both. I mean, there's people that show up to see them doing the kind of the skids and the wheelies and the kind of the spectacular stuff on track, but I think there's also a demand to see a bit more behind the helmet with the riders away from the track, and I think that's probably something that can be worked on, presenting the riders in a kind of more attractive way, in a way that is maybe a little more relatable. I don't think it's necessarily the easiest thing when you compare it to something like, say, football or say Formula One. MotoGP still is very much a niche sport. It is still very much dominated by two nationalities in particular. English maybe doesn't come as naturally or as easily to some of those Spaniards or Italians as it does in maybe other realms, especially in Formula One, where the level of English is near on perfect for everyone, and therefore the ability to communicate kind of freely and kind of fearlessly in front of the camera is maybe a little higher. But yeah, I don't see why there's a reason why you can't just show both of those things. I mean, the internet is kind of it's limitless, it's vast, and I think you are wanting to see kind of both of those things. I think you want to basically be following something that's cool, especially as a younger person, and the stuff that MotoGP guys do on the track is cool, and trying to portray them as cool off the track, I think, is maybe a challenge that is still in process.
My personal view is I think you just need to communicate with them. I mean, if somebody like Miguel Oliveira wants to be presented on social media as a family man, then that's the kind of content you need to be creating around him. If somebody wants to be the motocrosser or somebody else wants to be the gym animal, we know Aleix Espargaro, for example, from his own YouTube videos, is heavily into his cycling as well as his family. that's a way, perhaps MotoGP needs to push him more. As an example, in Supercross a couple of years ago, as part of opening ceremonies, they always have the intro, these huge videos they pump out on the massive screens they have in the stadia over there. And Eli Tomac, the champion from 2 years ago, was basically presented as the hunter. He's a guy who lives sort of in the depths of Colorado, likes to get out with a bow, and hunts. And he was they made a whole video play around that. At the moment, Jet Lawrence, who's kind of the sort of Marc Marquez or the Pedro Acosta, if you like, of the series, he's got a very cool sort of intro video where he's walking into like a boxing ring. It's fantastically edited, looks like a music video, but then he emerges into the stadium like he's sort of just walking in. It's sort of seamless, it works. But then also, as part of the intro video, they have this kind of infantile TikTok dance going on where they're trying to explain the race format and everything else. And I think kids will look at it and laugh whatever, but I also think if we talk about MotoGP in particular, for the next couple of seasons, these guys are going to be topping 220 miles per hour each weekend. And I think that's a degree of extreme performance and gnarly kind of balls to the wall activity that doesn't really marry with that kind of japery.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say I'm a 59-year-old man, so asking me how to attract teenagers is not going to be I'm not able to give the best possible advice. But yeah, I think we have to sort of figure out what the essence is of motorcycling and try and present that, what the essence of MotoGP is. The risk is that the companies involved, especially the factories, want too much control. They're too afraid of, damage to their image. That to me is the biggest problem. They're very conservative and afraid of taking risks, and we need to take more risks to make it more attractive. The story behind darts. Darts used to be an extremely tedious sport full of fat old men, and it still is. It still is, but now they've all got mohawks and personalities because they've been told to have a personality because Barry Hearn, the promoter, took darts and turned it into an entertainment product. He gave people a personality and told them to be that personality. Now, I don't think that's going to work with MotoGP, but it's that sort of approach, this kind of personality approach. But that also means you've got to allow people to go out and be personalities.
I think Dorna are trying to pivot with this, and they have been trying over the last 2 years. The MotoGP social media reach now is like 50 million, I think, and I saw a press release, they've estimated it's more than 120 million with all the Paddock members, the riders and the brands combined. You look at Marc Marquez, for example. I think his partner is an influencer, and Marc has 7 million followers on Instagram. There's almost 3 million people at the circuits throughout 2023 alone. There is vast audience potential there, and I think it's really good that Dorna are looking at themselves thinking we need to work harder, we need to work better, we need to sort of market the sport and not just rest on the laurels of the TV contracts and letting the broadcasters do the promotional work. So I just think they need to maybe apply some more rounded international thinking to how they're making use of these riders, and importantly communicate with the riders themselves, because if you have them on board, then they're going to be much more engaged and much more enthusiastic about doing that kind of off the bike work. Yeah,
but the trouble is that riders don't give a shit, they just want to win.
Well, if they can make more money, then I guess they might be slightly more interested.
If they have to sacrifice winning to make more money, they will go for winning.
Oh, Dave, so pragmatic. Ending that subject, KTM refreshed their naked bike Duke range for 2024, and the KTM 990 Duke is now the prince to the 1390 and the 1290 Super Dukes, with some other exciting street bikes to come from the Austrians in the next few months. The 990 is slightly cheaper than the Super Duke, but just as badass, with torques for days, a lot more planted, but an extremely agile sense of handling and advanced electronics and other features. Look at ktm.com for more details on the KTM 990 Duke and get to an authorized dealer now to ask about a test ride. As mentioned at the top of the show, right at the beginning, we're delighted to have Dani Pedrosa on the Paddock Pass podcast. The 38-year-old MotoGP legend talks about the life of a test rider, those wild cards, the differences in bikes, and why he's a bit more sympathetic to the media these days. He stomached Mio and I throwing questions at him for a good 15 to 20 minutes, so I guess that was, a case of proof in point. But here's Dani. Dani, it's great to have you on the Paddock Pass podcast. We've got some questions for you. First of all, can you explain to some of our listeners, how is the contract of a MotoGP test rider? I mean, how many kind of days do you have to work? And is it a situation where KTM can call you and say, we have something new, come to Mugello next week? I mean, how does it work for you exactly?
Hi. Hello to everyone, and thanks for having me. And yes, I have a contract where you have more or less specified the days you have to ride. Obviously, there is a plan with the team where we know how many days more or less we can do. So that's what more or less the contract says. But obviously, if we have any situation where at any given time we have some change schedule or we have to add a few more days of testing, then we do it. We are flexible on this on both ends.
Dani, I have a question. When you look at each MotoGP test rider for each factory, they have quite different profiles. I mean, you're a 3-time world champion, but then Ducati has someone like Michele Pirro, who won, I think, just one race in Moto2. Lorenzo Savadori and Aprilia never really, I think, even raced in MotoGP that much. In your opinion, what actually makes a good test rider, and how different is it, the qualities you need to be a good test rider, how different is it to the qualities you need to be a good racer?
Well, I think you mentioned it very well. So every manufacturer has a different approach, a little bit on the rider. I think this is due to two factors. One is availability, so you not always can get a certain type of rider to do that role. So you have to go along with what you can get. And the other thing is that every manufacturer is in a different position. So you have, like in my case with KTM, when I joined, the team itself had very low experience in MotoGP. So it's totally different procedure you have to go through instead of someone like Honda or Yamaha, who has a long history in the championship. Therefore, maybe you have other priorities as well. But nonetheless, it's always very important whether you have a good feedback and the communication between the rider and the engineer is correct. Yeah, I think that I would say is the first quality, that the communication or the language it's good for both ends. And the second, I would say, you have to be somehow a good leader, because you have to be sure of what you're doing, what you're saying, and what are you trying to steer the team to. So with today's rules, it's difficult to always make the perfect choice, because you have so detailed options that afterwards you can't change. And so if you make a mistake, you then have to deal with that for the whole season. And that's why it's super important to have it very clear and to express that to the team in a way that they are confident about it.
In Qatar, Dani, Aleix Espargaro was saying how physical the Aprilia is due to the aerodynamics and the downforce. How much of a difference do you feel now, say, with the latest RC16 compared to your last year of racing? I mean, is it different worlds?
Well, it is. Every time is going up. The physical demanding with these aeros is going up. You have much more difficulty to handle the bike left to right, and also to maneuver when you are following someone, and therefore the speeds are higher in the corners, so more G and more high speeds in the intersections make the bike less agile. So you are also setting the bike with this aero in a way to be way more stable into the brakes, or way more stable in the straights. So more stability also is less agility. So the constant fight I have with my friends in aero department in KTM is actually this one. No, they make something that in the numbers it looks super. I don't know, much more efficient in aerodynamics, in load, in drag, etc. but then when you try it on the bike, you barely can move the bike and decide what you want to do with it. So that takes time of your inputs on the bike to actually do things in between the corners. And when you are slower or you have less input to the bike, then you are more you follow more what the bike is doing and not the bike following you. So that's the constant argument we have in order to find the balance between the good aero in terms of numbers for the team and load, and then the good one that can still be agile enough to handle the bike in the way you want, and
Dani,
also not to blow up your arms and have physical issues at the end of the race. Yes.
Dani, my question is very similar to Adam's. You mentioned how different the bikes are now with all the aero. Are they more enjoyable to ride now, in your opinion, or do you prefer, just from pure enjoyment side of things, do you prefer the older bikes?
Easy question. I prefer the older ones. Yeah, and yes, it's true. I mean, we are where we are now here, and I don't complain. But I mean, the bikes without the aero, they were more fun for sure.
How fast does development work at KTM? I mean, for example, if you try a chassis and you say, guys, we need more turning, I mean, how quickly do they then bring something for you to try again? Is it just as an example? I know everything's kind of different.
Yes, I mean, it depends on the time and depends on the priority. Let's say, for instance, the turning thing that you mentioned in KTM, when I joined them, actually this was an issue, and so we worked a lot on that for 2-3 years, and so it was a constant, like chassis, suspension, triple cams, shocks, things that could touch that area. So we were all the time having updates and ideas to try to modify the turning until we got it. So once we got it, then we moved on to a different priority. But when it's the priority, I would say it's rather quickly. And so far, the reaction of the factory has been always very proactive and very reliable, because many times you also can try 1,000 things, but nothing is working. But at least every step we tried and kind of more or less show us the next step afterwards to implement an improvement. So I would say relatively fast. Yeah, fast.
Dani, we saw, I think Brad Binder said after Sepang, it was the best, or one of the best preseason tests that he's ever had. And Pit Bauer, just before the Qatar test, was telling us journalists that he expects KTM to be fighting for the World Championship this year. That's the undoubted aim. From what you've seen during preseason and what you've experienced on the bike, do you think KTM is in that position? Are they ready to fight now for the MotoGP World Championship?
Well, it's hard to say for me if we are going to be at the end of the championship. They're fighting for the title on points. At the moment, it's too early. But looking at the two tests in preseason, it looks like Ducati still have an edge on us. I think the riders are pretty happy with the latest bike development they have, and they are really performing very well. So I think having said that, also it's true that the track conditions were pretty much perfect in both tests. So we have to add to that the thing that once you are in a GP, weather is changing. Sometimes you have rain, sometimes it's cold, hot. So that won't make the track conditions perfectly, so that maybe the other brands cannot extremize his potential at best, because you have some limitations from track due to the grip, low grip, or maybe also we have to see the factor of the new Pirelli's Moto2 and Moto3, how they play a part with the Michelin rubber on race. So so far in the test, it's been just Michelin. So we know that when when the track is full of rubber of Michelin, then the lap times are incredible fast, and the feeling on the bike is incredible. But once you mix certain other situations, could be that maybe the difference are not as we have seen in the test. So it's still unknown, and we'll see. But I think what Pete is also referring to, it's a mentality thing. So so far the team has been trying to catch up every time, because we are coming from way back. But I think now it's coming a time where the mentality has to be to approach that goal. So I don't know if we will be at the end or not fighting, but at least the mentality is there. So and that's how I see it.
Does making 1 or 2 wildcards per season or every 2 seasons allow you to calm the competitiveness inside you? I mean, do you have any other activities that you do for that adrenaline?
No, actually, once I retire, I was perfectly fine with that. So I don't have that will like I used to have when I was a racer. So I.
Speaking about when you do race, Danny, I know you won 31 MotoGP races, but last year you surprised everyone when you finished 4th at Misano. I think just 4 seconds off the victor there. Your 3rd race in 5 years, which was quite a ridiculous result. I mean, would that rank among some of your best performances, would you say? How would you kind of assess what you showed last year in MotoGP? Because it was quite phenomenal.
Yes, I'm really. First of all, I'm really happy because I mean several points in that race. Actually, I was almost 5 years of competition, plus plus I'm older, and also I'm racing new generation, and as well all the technological development. So you have new tools and things, and how the rules are different in the race. So I was still I was very happy to still perform with all that change. And I'm racing a different bike. So I always was racing a Honda, and this time I was racing a KTM. So it's good for me to do such a great result with a different manufacturer. But no, I won't consider one of my best, because in the past, obviously, I was injured and I had to fight for titles, and you have a different type of pressure in that scenario of the wild card. Obviously, you want to do good, but you don't have the pressure of a championship or doing a good result.
Last one from me, Danny. Sometimes we see you at the Grand Prix races. How exactly do you help Jack and Brad? And, do you actually enjoy doing some of the media work now, like appearing on DAZN and doing other stuff?
I'm trying. I'm trying to adapt to this. As you all know, I'm not super natural thing for me to do the media stuff. But yes, it's true that this opportunity with DAZN is giving me the time to approach it in a different way, also to be part of the other side, which I was all the time facing. And then, I kind of feel a different vibe now on that aspect. So I'm really keen to keep working more and keep trying to entertain some of the fans of MotoGP. And so I think I don't think I still know very well all what is behind this media stuff, but I'm fine. What was the actual question?
No, just how you might help Jack and Brad and the riders. Yeah.
So I try, actually, when I appear to a certain GP, I actually try not to do anything. So I go out, I watch, and I try to see what is going on the track, or what is going on with the GP, what is going on with the team inside the box, etc. But unless the riders ask me, I'm not trying to approach, because as I'm not there every weekend, I don't want either to make a change when I appear to one GP. So I try just to stay there. If they need or they want or they feel like, then I always can give some opinion on some of the things they want to know. But I personally try to stay a little bit back and not to change the atmosphere of what they have often.
Dani, just two more questions from me. The first is, I remember back in 2006, the excitement that everyone felt about you stepping up to the MotoGP World Championship as a three-time world champion. There was a lot of excitement about that. We have a similar situation this year with a certain Spanish teenager stepping up into MotoGP. Can you understand the kind of excitement, not just in Spain, but I think everywhere, that people want to see Pedro in MotoGP? And how would you assess his performances during pre-season? Because in Sepang in particular, it looked really, really special.
Yes, it's. I mean, every time you see someone strong coming up to MotoGP, like Mark did in his time, when I did, or Jorge Lorenzo, or Casey Stoner, then there is this atmosphere where this expectation is generated by the fans, by the media, and also at the end by the results. So I think Pedro is someone who is already showing how fast he's learning. And I've been with him in Malaysia, and I don't think he needs too much guidance. So by himself, he's already knowing where he has to go, what needs to be done. And so he knows where he's heading. That's what I'm trying to say. And that's leading him to learn super quick. And of course, this class is complicated and the rivals are also all very strong. So it's not going to be easy, but I think the learning curve is going to be faster than expected.
Okay, interesting. And Dani, if I give you 50 euros and I tell you you have to make a bet on who's going to win the World Championship this year, who's it going to be? Put you on the spot.
I mean, I would bet for us, obviously, for even if I lose my 50 euros. But I would say at the moment, Pecco looks very strong. No doubt about that. But in the championship, you never know. We have many races, many starts. Injuries can happen, bike failures can happen, or other riders' mistakes can affect your race as well. So it's nothing decided, even though at the moment he is very fast.
Dani, thanks ever so much for joining us on the podcast, and we look forward to learning what race you'll be joining us at this year.
Thank you.
Just 2 weeks left to sign up to our Patreon channel for the year, with a 10% discount for lots more extra content through 2024, including our daily Paddock Notes roundups from each day of a MotoGP Grand Prix. In less than 2 weeks, we'll be closing our eyes and whizzing a mouse pointer around the screen to decide who gets 2 Grand Prix Paddock passes to a fixture of their choice over the Qatar GP weekend. Also, it's Alpine Stars Fantasy League time. We've started the league. Simply click on Game Hub on MotoGP.com and create a profile. Build your team. It's really easy with 4 riders, a team and a brand, and then join our league. Search for Alpine Stars Paddock Pass Podcast, and for the eventual winner, we'll have some goodies on the post, as well as bragging rights against our own pathetic efforts, even though we're at every sodding GP. Guys, we talked about this a bit on the Paddock Pass podcast before, but I think, Bagnaia pretty much has to be the first pick for everybody, right? And then we have to just fudge around the budgeting issues for everybody else.
That's the way that it works. You try and look for the right way to do it. You try and look for the best value, and that is what I always manage to get wrong.
Yeah, you need to look at the certainties, obviously. I mean, I say this as if I'm like some sort of old sage, but really I'm as clueless as you guys. But yeah, I mean, my tactic last year was the manufacturer was obviously going to be Ducati, because there's at least going to be one bike there every weekend. And there's normally a decent chance that it could be the factory team, or maybe the Gresini team or the Pramac team. Choose one of them at your will. And then it's about kind of filling up the other spaces. So yeah, start with a couple of certainties and then work from there.
Yeah, don't do what I did last year and completely forget about it. It was like 3 GPs after Jerez, I realized Dani Pedrosa was still in my team. So obviously picking up a shitload of points in that system. So I think it has to be set before Q1. Is that right, guys?
Yes.
I think that's the cutoff point. So yeah, Join us on the Alpine Stars Paddock Pass podcast, Fantasy League, and win some prizes. We should have another special guest for the official MotoGP preview show next week. It's prediction time, Dave, your favorite period of the year. It'll be the USA's last Grand Prix winner in the Premier class. We'll be making our bold and brash calls for 2024, talking about why we love and loathe Qatar and much more.